He looked at her worn-out shoes and saw a liability. She looked at his signed divorce papers and saw his funeral, figuratively speaking. Everyone in New York's elite circle thought Henry Lawson was the catch of the century, and his quiet, unassuming wife, Gabriella, was just the placeholder he'd outgrown. He threw her out like yesterday's trash to make room for a younger, flashier mistress, thinking he'd won. But Henry forgot one crucial detail. Quiet women often hold the loudest secrets. He didn't just divorce a florist, he declared war on a princess. And when the crown comes off the shelf, heads are going to roll. The air inside Le Bernardin was always cold, but tonight, Gabriella felt it settle deep in her bones, sharper than usual. It was their 5th anniversary. 5 years of marriage to Henry Lawson, the man who had taken his father's mid-sized logistics firm and turned it into Lawson Global, a titan of industry that moved half the world's freight. Gabriella adjusted the collar of her dress. It was a simple navy sheath she had bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago. She knew it didn't fit here, amidst the silk, chiffon, and bespoke Italian suits of the Manhattan elite dining around them. She could feel the eyes of the staff lingering on her scuffed heels. She didn't care about the clothes, but she knew Henry did. He sat across from her, checking his Patek Philippe watch for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. He hadn't touched his wine. "You're late," Gabriella said softly, trying to offer a smile. "But I'm glad you made it. I ordered the tasting menu you like." Henry didn't look up from his phone. His thumbs flew across the screen, firing off an email that was likely worth more than the entire restaurant. When he finally locked his phone and placed it on the crisp white tablecloth, his expression was unreadable. It wasn't the look of a husband gazing at his wife. It was the look of a CEO evaluating a failing asset. "We need to talk, Ella," he said. He never called her Gabriella anymore. Just Ella, like she was something generic, a placeholder. "I have a gift for you," she said, reaching for her purse. She had spent 6 months knitting him a scarf from cashmere yarn she'd sourced herself, a quiet nod to the days when they were dating, and he used to complain about the New York wind biting his neck. "Stop," Henry said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of clinking silverware. He reached into his suit jacket. "I have something for you too, but I don't think you're going to want to open yours after you see this." He slid a thick manila envelope across the table. It hit the centerpiece, a single white orchid, with a heavy thud. Gabriella froze. She looked at the envelope, then at his cold, blue eyes. "What is this? Tickets? A deed?" "It's an exit strategy," a female voice purred from behind her. Gabriella turned. Standing there, draped in a red dress that cost more than Gabriella's entire wardrobe, was Lydia Banks. Lydia was everything Gabriella wasn't. Loud, undeniably stunning, and plastered all over Instagram as the new face of Vogue Cosmetics. She was also Henry's executive assistant, a title that everyone knew was a lie. Lydia pulled out the chair next to Henry, without asking, and sat down. She placed a manicured hand over Henry's, interlacing her fingers with his. Henry didn't flinch. He squeezed back. "Henry." Gabriella's voice trembled. "What is she doing here? It's our anniversary." "It's the end of the fiscal year, sweetie," Lydia said, answering for him. She picked up Henry's wine glass and took a sip, leaving a crimson lipstick stain on the rim. "And Henry is cleaning up the balance sheet." Henry finally spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "They're divorce papers, Ella. I had my lawyers draw them up this morning. I signed them an hour ago." The room seemed to tilt. "Divorce? But why?" "We just bought the house in the Hamptons. We weren't talking about anything," Henry snapped, his patience fraying. "You were talking. I was tolerating. Look at you, Ella. Look at this place. You don't belong here. You never did." He gestured vaguely at her outfit, his face twisted in a sneer of embarrassment. "I'm the CEO of Lawson Global. I dine with senators, oil tycoons, royalty, and I bring you, and you look like a librarian who got lost on the way to a book sale." "I supported you when the company was nothing," Gabriella whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I worked 2 jobs so you could pay the patent fees. I cooked, I cleaned, And you were compensated," Henry interrupted coldly. "I paid off your student loans. I gave you a roof over your head in one of the most expensive zip codes in the world. But let's be real. You're plain. You're unambitious. You're content arranging flowers at that little shop downtown while I'm trying to conquer the world. I need a partner who looks the part. A power couple." He lifted Lydia's hand and kissed her knuckles. "Lydia gets it. She knows how to play the game. She shines. You fade." Lydia smirked, tossing her hair. "Don't make this hard, Ella. You're a nice girl. Just simple. Henry needs a queen, not a peasant." The word peasant hung in the air. Gabriella looked down at her hands. They were rough from the garden, from working with rose thorns and soil. They were honest hands. "You're leaving me for her?" Gabriella asked, her voice strengthening slightly. "Because she's pretty? Because she fits," Henry corrected. "And because I'm bored, Ella. I'm bored of the mediocrity. I want excitement. I want status." He tapped the envelope. "The terms are generous. You get the apartment in Queens, the one we bought for your mother before she passed. You get a lump sum of $50,000. In exchange, you sign a strict NDA. You never talk about me, the company, or our marriage. You disappear." $50,000. He made that in an hour. Gabriella looked at the man she had loved for 5 years. She saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance that had slowly replaced his ambition. He truly believed he was untouchable. He believed she was nobody. Slowly, Gabriella reached out and took the envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't cry. The tears threatened to spill, but a sudden, icy calm washed over her, a sensation she hadn't felt since she was a very young girl, back in the great hall of her grandmother's estate. "You think I'm simple," Gabriella said, her voice dropping an octave. "It wasn't a question." "I know you are," Henry scoffed. "Sign the papers, Ella. Don't cause a scene. You can't afford a lawyer who can go up against mine." Gabriella stood up. She picked up her purse, leaving the hand-knitted scarf on the table. She looked at Lydia, then at Henry. "You're right, Henry. I don't fit in your world." She paused, her brown eyes suddenly sharpening, gleaming with a terrifying intelligence he had never noticed before. "But be very careful what you throw away. Sometimes what looks like glass is actually a diamond." "Save the poetry for the flower shop," Lydia laughed. Gabriella turned and walked out of the restaurant. She didn't look back. She didn't see Henry signal the waiter for champagne, celebrating his freedom. She walked out onto the bustling street of Manhattan, the cold wind hitting her face. She pulled out her phone. It was an old model, screen cracked. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 7 years. The area code was international. It rang once, twice. "Alican Palace, Chief of Staff speaking." A stiff, accented voice answered. "Arthur," Gabriella said, her voice shifting. Gone was the timid wife. In her place was something steelier. "It's Gabriella. Prepare the jet. I'm coming home." There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Your Highness, is it really you?" "Yes," she said, glancing back at the glowing window of the restaurant, where her husband was toasting his mistress. "And Arthur?" Tell grandmother I'm done playing commoner. The vacation is over." The next morning, the humiliation began in earnest. Gabriella had returned to the penthouse she shared with Henry solely to pack her things. She hadn't expected him to be there. She certainly hadn't expected Lydia to be there, wearing one of Gabriella's silk robes, drinking coffee out of Gabriella's favorite mug. Henry was leaning against the marble island in the kitchen, scrolling through his iPad. When Gabriella walked in, he didn't even look up. "You have an hour," he said casually. "I have a real estate agent coming at noon to appraise the place. Lydia thinks the decor is too drab. We're remodeling." "Drab is a polite word for it," Lydia chimed in, running a finger over the kitchen counter. "It smells like old books and lavender in here. We need something modern, sharp." Gabriella ignored them. She walked straight to the guest bedroom where she had slept the night before, or rather, stared at the ceiling. She pulled out 2 suitcases. She didn't take much. She left the jewelry Henry had bought her, gaudy things he chose to show off his wealth rather than suit her taste. She left the designer dresses he forced her to wear to galas where he ignored her. She packed her comfortable sweaters, her worn-out jeans, her books, and a small, locked wooden box she kept hidden at the back of her closet. As she dragged the suitcases into the living room, Henry chuckled. "That's it?" he asked. 7 years of life, 5 years of marriage, and it fits in 2 bags. I told you, Lydia. No ambition. A minimalist to a fault. "I took what matters," Gabriella said evenly. "Make sure you leave the keys," Henry said. "And the credit cards. I cancelled them this morning, so don't try to buy a consolation prize on your way out." Lydia walked over to Gabriella, invading her personal space. She reached out and touched the collar of Gabriella's coat. "Poor thing. You really have nowhere to go, do you? That apartment in Queens is a dump. If you need a job, I think my housekeeper is looking for an assistant. You're good at cleaning messes, aren't you?" Gabriella looked Lydia in the eye. For a split second, the air in the room grew heavy. Gabriella stood perfectly straight, her chin lifting in a way that was almost imperceptible, but radiated an intense, ancient authority. "Enjoy the house, Lydia," Gabriella said quietly. "It's built on debt and leverage, just like your relationship." Lydia blinked, taken aback by the sudden sharpness. "Excuse me?" "And Henry," Gabriella turned to him, "you wanted a divorce. You wanted me gone so you could chase status. You have your wish. But remember this moment. Remember that I gave you every chance to be a decent man." "Get out!" Henry snapped, his face reddening. He didn't like the way she was looking at him. It wasn't the look of a defeated woman. It was the look of a judge delivering a verdict. "Get out before I have security throw you out." Gabriella nodded. She wheeled her bags to the elevator. As the doors closed, she saw them. Henry returning to his screen, Lydia laughing and whispering in his ear. They looked like royalty in their own minds. The elevator descended 40 floors. When the doors opened to the lobby, the doorman, an older man named Henry, rushed over. "Mrs. Lawson, let me help you with those," he said, reaching for the bags. "Thank you, Henry." She smiled sadly. "But it's just Gabriella now, and I can manage." "You're leaving?" Henry asked, lowering his voice. He knew the rumors. The staff always knew. "I am. Take care of yourself, Henry." She walked out of the building and hailed a yellow cab. "JFK Airport," she told the driver. "Private aviation terminal." The driver looked at her in the rear-view mirror, at her simple coat, her scuffed bags, and her tired eyes. "Private terminal. You sure, lady? That's for the big shots." "I'm sure," Gabriella said, looking out the window as the city of New York blurred past her. 20 minutes later, the cab pulled up to the gate of the private airfield. The driver hesitated. "Lady, I can't go in there without a pass. You sure you're at the right place?" Before she could answer, the heavy iron gates began to open. A sleek black Range Rover with diplomatic plates rolled out, flanked by 2 motorcycles. A tall man in an immaculately tailored black suit stepped out of the car. He had silver hair and the posture of a military commander. This was Arthur, the royal steward of the House of Valoria. The cab driver's jaw dropped. "Whoa, is that the president or something?" Gabriella handed the driver a $100 bill. "Keep the change." She stepped out of the cab. Arthur marched forward, followed by 2 guards. He didn't just walk, he processed. When he reached Gabriella, he didn't offer a handshake. In the middle of the dusty tarmac, with the cab driver watching in disbelief, Arthur bowed. It was a deep, formal bow, bent at the waist, eyes lowered. The 2 guards followed suit immediately. "Your Royal Highness," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome back. The kingdom has missed you." Gabriella looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, her shoulders relaxed. She wasn't Mrs. Lawson, the failed wife of a tech CEO. She wasn't the poor girl from the flower shop. "Hello, Arthur," she said, her voice regaining the polished, aristocratic lilt of her youth. "Take these bags. Burn them." Arthur looked up, surprised. "Burn them, Mom?" "Everything in them," Gabriella said, stepping toward the waiting car, "except the wooden box. Burn the clothes, burn the memories. If I am to take my title back, I cannot smell like Henry Lawson's failure." "As you wish, Princess Gabriella." As the motorcade swept her away toward the waiting Gulf Stream, G850, emblazoned with the royal crest of Valoria, a golden hawk clutching a rose, Gabriella allowed herself one final thought of her ex-husband. He wanted a power couple, she thought, watching the Manhattan skyline shrink in the distance. He has no idea what power really looks like. But he will. The kingdom of Valoria was a jewel tucked between the snow-capped Alps and the azure Mediterranean coast. It was small, exclusive, and immensely wealthy, a sovereign state known for its banking secrecy, its rare diamond mines, and its impenetrable royal family. As the Gulf Stream G850 touched down on the private royal airstrip, Gabriella looked out the window. She saw the rolling vineyards, the ancient stone fortifications, and dominating the skyline, the Sapphire Palace. It sat atop the highest cliff, a sprawling fortress of white marble and blue slate roofs. It was home. It was also the cage she had run away from 7 years ago. "We have arrived, Your Highness," Arthur said softly, unbuckling his seatbelt. Gabriella stood up. She had changed on the plane. Gone were the frayed jeans and the Macy's sweater. She now wore a tailored cream pantsuit by a Valorian designer, impeccable and sharp. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun to keep out of her face while arranging flowers, was now blown out in sleek, chestnut waves. When the cabin door opened, the cool mountain air rushed in, smelling of pine and the sea. A red carpet had been rolled out on the tarmac. At the end of it stood a line of 20 royal guards in ceremonial blue and gold uniforms, standing at rigid attention. And there, leaning on a cane topped with a diamond the size of a walnut, was Queen Matriarch Helena, her grandmother, the woman who had ruled Valoria with an iron fist for 60 years. Gabriella walked down the stairs, her heart pounding harder than it ever had during Henry's shouting matches. Facing a furious CIO was one thing, facing the matriarch was another. Gabriella stopped 3 feet from the Queen. She curtsied, low, graceful, perfect muscle memory taking over. "Grandmother," Gabriella said, keeping her head bowed. The Queen Matriarch tapped her cane on the pavement. "Look at you. Thin. Pale. And is that polyester residue I smell?" Gabriella looked up, The old woman's eyes were sharp as flint, but there was a flicker of relief in them. "I have returned, grandmother." "So I see," Helena said, stepping forward to grip Gabriella's chin with a gloved hand. "You ran away to find real love? You wanted to live like a commoner. You wanted to know what it felt like to be chosen for you, not your crown." She paused, her voice turning dangerously soft. "And? Did your American prince choose you?" The question cut deep. Gabriella thought of the divorce papers, the mistress, the way Henry looked at her like she was expired milk. "No," Gabriella said, her voice turning cold. "He chose a model, and he divorced me because he thought I lacked status." The Queen Matriarch threw her head back and laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "He left a princess for a model because of status? Oh, the irony is delicious. It is tragic, child, but delicious." She took Gabriella's arm. "Come, the lawyers are already assembling. We have 7 years of assets to unfreeze. Your personal trust fund has accumulated interest. It sits at roughly $400 million. And that is just your pocket money." Gabriella stiffened. Henry had thrown her $50,000 like it was a fortune. "I don't want the money, grandmother," Gabriella said, as they walked toward the waiting Rolls-Royce Phantom. "I want revenge." The Queen Matriarch smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "Then you have finally learned the family motto. Nemo me impune lacessit. No one attacks us with impunity. But we do not scream, Gabriella. We do not make scenes in restaurants. We destroy them on the balance sheet. We ruin them while sipping tea." Meanwhile, in New York, the victory was already losing its shine. Henry Lawson sat in his corner office, staring at a spreadsheet that was bleeding red. Lawson Global was growing, yes, but the cost of expansion was eating them alive. He had leveraged the company to the hilt to buy a fleet of new cargo ships, banking on a massive contract with a Chinese distributor that had just fallen through. "Henry, baby." Lydia walked in, not bothering to knock. She was wearing a new diamond necklace, one Henry had put on his personal credit card yesterday. "The remodeling crew says the marble for the kitchen has to be imported from Italy. It's going to be another 80 grand. Henry rubbed his temples. "Just pay it, Lydia. Whatever you want." "You seem stressed," she pouted, sitting on the edge of his mahogany desk. "We're supposed to be celebrating. You're free. The dead weight is gone." "The dead weight didn't cost 80 grand for a kitchen counter," Henry muttered under his breath. "What was that?" "Nothing," Henry sighed, forcing a smile. He couldn't let Lydia know the liquidity issues. She was drawn to success. If he showed weakness, she'd lose interest. He needed a win. A big one. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Lawson, your CFO is on line 1. He says it's urgent." Henry picked up the phone. "What is it, Miller?" "We have a problem, Henry." Miller's voice was shaky. "The banks are getting nervous about the debt-to-equity ratio. With the China deal dead, our stock dropped 4% this morning. We need a major contract injection, or the board is going to start asking questions about your spending." "I'm working on it," Henry snapped. "I'm the CEO. I'll find a deal." "There is one thing," Miller said hesitantly. "It just hit the Bloomberg terminal. The Kingdom of Valoria announced the Royal Port Initiative. They are tripling the size of their harbour to become the primary trade hub for Southern Europe. It's a $10 billion infrastructure contract. Logistics, shipping, supply chain management." Henry sat up straighter. Valoria. He knew of it. The playground of the ultra-rich. Old money. The kind of place that didn't just have wealth, it had history. $10 billion? Henry asked, his greed igniting. "Who's managing the bid?" "The Royal Treasury. They are accepting proposals from foreign firms starting next week. But Henry, it's invite only. You need a royal referral just to get in the room. Henry looked at Lydia, who was admiring her reflection in the window. He needed to be a power couple. He needed to be in that room. Get me the dossier on Valoria, Henry ordered. I don't care who I have to bribe or whose ring I have to kiss. We are getting that contract. He hung up, feeling the adrenaline rush back. This was it. This was the level he belonged at. He would land the Valoria deal, save his company, and prove to everyone, especially his boring ex-wife, wherever she was, that he was a king of industry. Little did he know, the royal referral he needed had just sat across from him at dinner 2 nights ago, knitting a scarf he didn't want. 3 weeks had passed since Gabriella's return. The transformation was complete. She sat at the head of the mahogany table in the war room of the Sapphire Palace. The walls were lined with oil paintings of her ancestors, kings and queens who had led armies. Gabriella looked every bit their descendant now. She wore a structured crimson blazer with the royal crest embroidered in gold thread on the lapel. On her finger sat the signet ring of the High Stewardess, a position she had assumed immediately upon her return. Across from her sat the Minister of Trade, the Royal Treasurer, and Arthur. The request for proposals has been circulated, Your Highness, the Minister of Trade said, sliding a thick binder toward her. We have received inquiries from Maersk, DHL, and several conglomerates in Dubai. Gabriella opened the binder. Her eyes scanned the list. And the American firms? A few, the minister said, including an aggressive push from Lawson Global. They have been persistent. They've sent gifts to the consulate. They've tried to bypass the vetting process. Gabriella's lips curled into a faint, dangerous smile. Lawson Global. Their financials? Shaky, the treasurer noted. High leverage. The CEO, Henry Lawson, is spending heavily on personal assets, while the company carries significant debt. He is desperate for cash flow. If he doesn't get this contract, he will likely face a shareholder revolt within the quarter. Perfect, Gabriella said softly. Arthur cleared his throat. Your Highness, surely you aren't considering them. The firm is unstable, and the man is... Well, we know the man. I am not considering them for the job, Arthur, Gabriella said, closing the binder with a snap. I am considering them for the lesson. She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the cliffs. Here is the plan. We will host the Grand Royal Gala next Saturday to announce the finalists for the contract. It will be the event of the decade. Dignitaries, celebrities, the press. She turned back to the room. Send an invitation to Henry Lawson. Make it look exclusive. The golden ticket. Tell him he is one of only 3 finalists being considered for the $10 billion deal. But he isn't qualified, the minister argued. He doesn't know that, Gabriella countered. Tell him that to demonstrate his financial stability to the crown, he must place a good faith deposit in the royal escrow account, 10% of the bid value. The treasurer's eyes widened. 10%? That's nearly $100 million. He doesn't have that in cash. No, Gabriella agreed. He doesn't, which means he will have to leverage everything he has left to raise it. He will mortgage his houses, his stocks, his future. He will bet it all on this one night, thinking he has the deal in the bag. And when he arrives? Arthur asked. When he arrives, Gabriella said, he will find out who the chairman of the Royal Selection Committee is. New York, 2 days later. Henry screamed in triumph, throwing the heavy cream-colored envelope into the air. It was embossed with real gold leaf. I told you, he yelled, grabbing Lydia and spinning her around. I told you I'm invincible. Look at this. An invitation to the Sapphire Palace. The Sapphire Palace, Lydia. Lydia snatched the invitation from the floor, her eyes scanning the calligraphy. Her Royal Highness requests the pleasure of Mr. Henry Lawson. Henry, this is huge. Do you know who goes to these parties? The Monacos, the Windsors, Hollywood A-listers. Forget the celebrities, Henry said, pacing the room frantically. Read the attached letter. We are top 3 finalists. Top 3. If I land this, I'm a billionaire. Not a millionaire. A billionaire. He grabbed his phone and dialed Miller. Miller, we're in. Valoria invited us. That's incredible, Henry, Miller said, though he sounded hesitant. But did you read the entry requirements? The solvency deposit? I saw it, Henry dismissed. 100 million. Standard for sovereign wealth deals. It's not standard, Henry. It's exorbitant, and we don't have it. To raise that kind of cash by next week, we'd have to put up the Hamptons house, the penthouse, your personal stock options, and take a bridge loan against the company's fleet. If you don't get the contract, if you lose, Lawson Global goes bankrupt, and you personally go bankrupt. Henry stopped pacing. He looked at Lydia. She was already on her phone, looking up dresses, muttering about how she needed to outshine a duchess. She looked at him with expectation. If he said no, if he played it safe, he was just another boring executive. If he said yes... I don't lose, Miller, Henry said, his voice dripping with arrogance. I'm Henry Lawson. I built this from nothing. The Valorians clearly want me. Why else would they invite me? They probably just need the deposit as a formality. It's a massive risk, Miller warned. Do it, Henry ordered. Liquidate the assets. Get the loan. Wire the money to the royal escrow. We are going to Valoria. He hung up and turned to Lydia. Pack your bags, babe, and buy the most expensive dress in New York. We're going to meet the royal family. Lydia squealed and kissed him. I'm going to be a queen of the ball. Henry smirked at his reflection in the mirror. He felt like a god. He had gotten rid of the dead weight, and now he was ascending. He briefly wondered where Gabriella was, probably struggling to pay rent in Queens. Poor Ella, he thought with a cruel chuckle. She'll see me on the news next week, shaking hands with the Queen, and she'll realize just how big of a mistake she made not fighting for me. He had no idea that the Queen he was preparing to impress was the woman he had evicted from his apartment 3 weeks ago, and he had no idea that the deposit he just authorized was the final nail in his own coffin. The trap was set. The invitation was accepted. The plane was fueled. Gabriella stood on the balcony of the palace, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. Arthur stepped up beside her. The wire transfer has been confirmed, Your Highness, Arthur said. Mr. Lawson has liquidated his personal portfolio. The money is in the royal escrow. Excellent, Gabriella said, taking a sip of tea. Are you nervous about seeing him? Arthur asked. Gabriella touched the diamond necklace at her throat, a piece from the crown jewels worth more than Lawson Global. No, Arthur, she replied. I'm not nervous. I'm just waiting for the curtain to rise. The Rolls-Royce that picked Henry and Lydia up from their hotel was not merely a car. It was a silent, velvet-lined cocoon that smelled of old money. As they wound their way up the cliffside road toward the Sapphire Palace, the sheer scale of Valoria hit Henry Lawson for the first time. He was used to the glass and steel canyons of New York, where wealth was measured in height. Here, wealth was measured in history. The walls passing by the window were built by Romans. The vineyards were older than the United States. Look at this, Lydia whispered, pressing her face against the glass. She was wearing a custom-made silver gown that shimmered like liquid mercury. It was backless, plunging, and aggressive. Henry, that gate, is that real gold? Solid, Henry said, though his throat felt tight. He adjusted his bow tie. He had checked his bank accounts on the way over. They were empty. Everything, the operating capital for Lawson Global, the mortgage on the Hamptons estate, his personal savings, was gone. It was all sitting in the Royal Escrow account. "It's just for tonight," he told himself, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "I signed the deal. I get the deposit back, plus the $10 billion advance. Tomorrow morning, I'm the richest man in logistics." The car stopped in the courtyard of Lions. A fountain the size of a swimming pool roared in the center. Searchlights swept the sky. There were hundreds of people, men in sashes and medals, women in tiaras. "Showtime," Henry said, masking his anxiety with a wide, toothpaste commercial smile. They stepped out. Cameras flashed. Not the paparazzi chaos of New York, but the polite, rhythmic clicking of official royal photographers. They moved toward the massive oak doors. A master of ceremonies stood there with a ledger. "Name?" the man asked, not looking up. "Henry Lawson," Henry announced loudly, making sure the people behind him heard. "CEO of Lawson Global. I'm a finalist." The man ran a finger down the parchment. "Ah, yes, Mr. Lawson. You have been cleared for the outer circle." "Outer circle?" Henry bristled. "I'm here for the main event. I need to speak to the committee chair." "All guests enter through the grand hall," the man said smoothly, waving him through. "Enjoy the evening." Inside, the palace was a sensory overload. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from frescoed ceilings. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive champagne. Henry grabbed 2 flutes from a passing tray and downed one immediately. He scanned the room. "We need to find the decision-maker," Henry told Lydia. "We need to schmooze." They navigated the crowd. Henry tried to strike up conversations, but he quickly realized he was out of his depth. He approached a group of men speaking German. "Elatleman," Henry interrupted, flashing his watch. "Henry Lawson, New York. Logistics." One of the men, an older gentleman with a scar on his cheek, turned slowly. "We know who you are, Mr. Lawson. You are the one who leveraged his entire fleet for the deposit. Bold." Henry puffed out his chest. "Fortune favors the bold." "In Valoria," the German replied coldly. "Fortune favors the prudent. You gamble like a cowboy, Mr. Lawson. The royal family does not like gamblers." The group turned their backs on him. Henry's face burned. "Arrogant Euro trash," he muttered to Lydia. "Wait until I have the contract. They'll be begging to ship on my vessels." Lydia, however, wasn't listening. She was staring at a painting on the far wall. It was a massive portrait of the royal family from 10 years ago. "Henry," she said, tugging on his sleeve. "Look at that girl in the back, the one in the blue dress." Henry glanced at it. A teenage girl with mousy brown hair stood behind the Queen matriarch. She looked plain, boring. "So? Doesn't she look a little like Ella?" Henry laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Ella? In an oil painting in a royal palace? Lydia, the altitude is getting to you. Ella is currently in Queens, probably eating takeout and crying over a cat. Focus." A hush suddenly fell over the room. The chatter died instantly. At the top of the grand staircase, 2 men in gold uniforms stepped forward with long trumpets. They blew a fanfare that resonated in Henry's chest. Arthur, the man Henry had seen only in emails, stepped onto the landing. He held a golden staff. "Ladies and Elatlemen," Arthur's voice boomed without a microphone. "Distinguished guests, finalists, pray silence for Her Majesty, the Queen Matriarch Helena." The crowd bowed. The old woman walked out, leaning on her cane, looking frail but terrifying. "And," Arthur continued, his voice rising, "the hostess of the evening, the chair of the Royal Selection Committee, The High Stewardess of the Realm. Henry nudged Lydia. Here we go. Watch me work. I'm going to charm the pants off this woman. Her Royal Highness, Princess Gabriella Valoria. Henry froze. Princess? Who? At the top of the stairs, the double doors opened. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a gown of deep, midnight blue velvet that hugged every curve, embroidered with thousands of tiny diamonds that caught the light like stars. On her head sat the Valorian sapphire tiara, heavy, ancient, and priceless. She stood tall, radiating a power that made the air in the room feel thinner. She looked down at the sea of faces with cool, imperious detachment. Henry blinked. He squinted. The woman began to descend the stairs. Every step was deliberate. As she got closer, the features became clearer. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the nose, the brown eyes that he had looked into for 5 years and dismissed as dull. Henry's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh my God! It was Gabriella. But it wasn't the Gabriella who clipped coupons. It wasn't the Gabriella who wore oversized sweaters to hide her figure. This was a creature of immense, terrifying beauty. She reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. She walked straight toward the center of the room, her gaze fixed on something in the distance. She stopped 10 feet from where Henry stood, paralyzed amidst the shattered glass. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locked onto his. There was no love in them, no hate. Just the cold, clinical appraisal of a predator looking at wounded prey. Welcome to Valoria, she said, her voice amplified by the acoustics of the hall. It was the voice he knew, but polished to a razor's edge. I trust the flight was comfortable. The silence in the grand hall was absolute. 300 of the world's most powerful people were watching, sensing blood in the water. Henry couldn't breathe. His brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the image of his submissive ex-wife with the royal figure standing before him. Ella, he croaked, his voice cracked, sounding pathetic in the vast room. Gabriella? Your Highness, Arthur corrected sharply, stepping up beside her. Gabriella raised a hand to silence Arthur. She didn't break eye contact with Henry. Mr. Lawson, she said smoothly, I see you received the invitation, and you brought a guest. She looked at Lydia. Lydia, usually so loud and brash, shrank back. In the presence of a real princess, her expensive silver dress looked cheap. Her makeup looked gaudy. She looked exactly what she was, a mistress trying to play dress-up. I don't understand, Henry stammered, his face draining of color. You're a florist. You're from Queens. I lived in Queens, Gabriella corrected. I worked as a florist because I enjoy flowers, and I lived simply because I wanted to see if a man could love me for me, and not for... She gestured to the palace around them. This. She took a step closer. The heels she wore were sharp, clicking rhythmically on the stone. You failed that test, Henry. Spectacularly. The crowd began to murmur. Whispers of ex-husband and the American rippled through the room. Henry felt the walls closing in. He switched into survival mode. He was a CEO. He could spin this. Ella, Your Highness, Henry said, forcing a laugh. This is quite a surprise, but surely we can keep personal matters separate. I'm here for business. I'm here for the Royal Port Initiative. Lawson Global is the best choice for... Lawson Global is a house of cards, Gabriella interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluster. She signaled to an aide, who projected a holographic screen onto the wall behind her. It displayed a complex financial chart. "I have reviewed your proposal, Mr. Lawson," she announced, addressing the entire room. "You claim solvency. You claim stability. Yet my auditors found that to pay the good faith deposit required for tonight, you liquidated 90% of your personal assets and took out a predatory bridge loan against your company's fleet." Henry's knees shook. That's standard leveraging. It shows commitment. It shows recklessness," Gabriella countered. "You gambled your employees' livelihoods on a vanity project. You are not a CEO, Mr. Lawson. You are a gambler who is currently out of chips." She turned to the crowd. "The Kingdom of Valoria requires partners with integrity, stability, honor. We do not do business with men who discard loyalty when something shinier comes along." Henry realized what was happening. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. "Ella, please," he hissed, stepping forward, ignoring the guards who tensed up. "Let's talk in private. We were married. I loved you." "Did you?" Gabriella asked, tilting her head. "Or did you love having a maid you didn't have to pay? Did you love having someone to look down on to make yourself feel tall?" She looked at Lydia, who was trembling. "And you, Miss Banks, you wanted a man with status. You wanted a power couple. Tell me, does he look powerful to you now?" Lydia looked at Henry. He was sweating, hunched over, his face a mask of terror. He looked weak. I didn't know," Lydia whispered to Gabriella. "I swear, Your Highness, I didn't know who you were." "Ignorance is not a defense," Gabriella said coldly. "Wait," Henry shouted, panic taking over. "The deposit, the $100 million. If you reject the bid, I get it back, right? It's a refundable deposit." Gabriella smiled. It was the smile she had given him at the restaurant, right before she left. The diamond smile. "Arthur," she said, "read the fine print of the invitation Mr. Lawson signed." Arthur opened a leather folder. "Clause 14, Section B. In the event that a finalist is found to have misrepresented their financial stability or moral standing, the good faith deposit shall be forfeited to the Royal Charity Fund as a penalty for wasting the Crown's time." Henry's heart stopped. "Forfeited?" he screamed. "You can't do that. That's my money. That's everything I have. You're stealing from me." "I am not stealing," Gabriella said calmly. "I am collecting a tax on arrogance. You tried to divorce your poor wife, Henry. You wanted to leave me with nothing. You wanted me to disappear." She spread her arms, the diamonds on her dress blazing under the chandeliers. "Well, here I am. And now you are the one with nothing." She snapped her fingers. "Guards, escort Mr. Lawson and his guest off the premises. They are trespassing." Two massive royal guards grabbed Henry by the arms. "No, you can't do this!" Henry struggled, his dignity completely gone. "Ella, Gabriella, I'm sorry. I'll take you back. We can fix this. Lydia means nothing to me. Nothing!" Lydia shrieked as a guard took her arm. "You bastard!" she yelled at Henry, slapping him across the face as they were dragged backward. "You told me you were rich. You told me you had this in the bag." Gabriella watched them go, shouting, crying, blaming each other, until the heavy oak doors slammed shut, silencing their noise. She stood alone in the center of the room. The silence stretched for a moment, and then the German shipping magnate began to clap. Slowly, the entire room joined in. It was a polite, respectful applause, acknowledging the power, acknowledging the Queen. Gabriella took a deep breath. She didn't feel triumph. She felt closure. But the story wasn't quite over. Henry Lawson was destroyed, yes, but a man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous man. And down in the darkness of the cliffside road, as the gates locked behind him, Henry wasn't thinking about bankruptcy. He was thinking about revenge. The heavy iron gates of the Sapphire Palace clicked shut, the sound echoing like a prison cell closing. Outside, the wind whipped off the Mediterranean, cold and unforgiving. Henry Lawson stood in the dirt, his tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder from where the royal guard had roughly escorted him out. Beside him, Lydia was shivering, clutching her bare arms. Her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, inky rivulets. "Call a car," Lydia snapped, her voice shrill. "Get us out of here. This place is a nightmare." Henry fumbled for his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. When he finally looked at the screen, his stomach bottomed out. "No service," he whispered. They jammed the signal near the gate. Lydia let out a scream of frustration. She turned on him, her eyes blazing with the fury of a woman who had just realized she bet on a losing horse. "This is your fault. You said you researched them. You said you were a genius." "Shut up, Lydia," Henry roared back, the vein in his forehead bulging. "I lost $100 million tonight. Do you understand that? My company is gone. My life is gone." "And whose fault is that?" Lydia hissed, stepping closer. "You were married to a princess for 5 years, Henry. 5 years. And you treated her like a maid. If you had just been halfway decent, we would be inside drinking champagne right now. But no, you had to be the big man. You had to divorce her to upgrade." "Well, congratulations. You just divorced the GDP of a small country." She spat on the ground, near his expensive Italian shoes. A pair of headlights appeared down the winding road. A local taxi summoned by one of the guards to clear the trash from the entrance. Lydia flagged it down. As she opened the door, Henry moved to get in. "No," Lydia said, slamming her hand against his chest. "I'm going to the airport. I'm going back to New York to see if I can salvage my modeling contract before news of this breaks." "Lydia, don't be crazy," Henry pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "We're a team, a power couple. Remember?" Lydia laughed, cold and cruel. "I date winners, Henry. You're not a winner anymore. You're a liability. Don't call me." She slid into the cab. The car peeled away, leaving Henry Lawson standing alone in the dark, the distant sound of the royal gala's music mocking him from the castle above. 3 days later, the reality of his situation set in with brutal efficiency. Henry was stuck in a budget motel on the outskirts of the capital city. His credit cards had been declined at the airport. His corporate accounts were frozen by the SEC back in New York due to irregularities regarding the bridge loan. He was effectively stranded in Valoria. But Henry Lawson was not a man who accepted defeat. In his mind, he was still the victim. He was the one who had been scammed. He sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at a crumpled copy of the divorce decree he had carried in his briefcase. He read it over and over, his eyes narrowing. "Wait," he muttered. A slow, manic grin spread across his face. He grabbed the landline and dialed the number of an international law firm he had found in the phone book. "I want to sue," Henry shouted the moment a lawyer picked up. "I want to sue for equitable distribution of assets. We were married for 5 years. Under international law, I am entitled to half of her earnings during the marriage. She was a princess. She has a trust fund. I own half of that." The lawyer on the other end paused. "Come to my office, Mr. Lawson. If what you say is true, you may have a case." An hour later, Henry stormed into the office of DuPont and Associates. He slammed the divorce papers on the desk. "She played me," Henry told the lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Henri. "She hid her identity. That's fraud. I want half the trust. I want alimony. I want the palace." Henri adjusted his glasses and picked up the document. He read it silently for 5 minutes. Henry tapped his foot impatiently, fantasizing about the look on Gabriella's face when he took everything back. Finally, Henri put the paper down. He looked at Henry with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Mr. Lawson," Henry said, "did you read the separation of assets clause? Clause 9? Yeah, Henry waved his hand. "I wrote that. It says, what's mine is mine, and what's hers is hers. I put it in there so she couldn't touch my shipping company. I wanted a clean break. No alimony, no asset discovery." "Exactly," Henry said. "You wanted to protect your wealth from a poor woman. So, you drafted an ironclad waiver. You explicitly waived your right to investigate her financial holdings. You explicitly waived your right to any spousal support. You signed a document stating that you leave the marriage with only what you brought in." Henry froze. But I didn't know she was rich. That changes things." "It changes nothing," Henry said, closing the file. "The contract is valid. By trying to be greedy and deny her a penny of your money, you legally denied yourself $1 billion of hers. You outsmarted yourself, Mr. Lawson." "There is no case." Henry sat there, mouth agape. The silence was deafening. He had built the trap himself. Every cruel clause he had inserted to hurt Gabriella was now a bar across his own prison cell. Before he could argue, the door to the office opened. 2 uniformed officers from the Valorian Royal Police stepped in. "Henry Lawson?" the lead officer asked. "What now?" Henry slumped. "We have a warrant for your arrest, issued by the United States Department of Justice, forwarded to Interpol. Charges of bank fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying corporate assets to secure the loan for your good faith deposit." Henry stood up, his legs shaking. "But I can pay it back. Just give me time." "You have no time, sir, and you have no money." The officer handcuffed him. "You are being extradited to New York." As they dragged him out of the office, Henry caught a glimpse of a television screen in the waiting room. It was a live broadcast of the Royal Gala's conclusion. There, on the screen, was Gabriella. She wasn't wearing a crown or sitting on a throne. She was standing in the royal gardens, wearing a simple white dress, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. She looked radiant. She looked free. A reporter on the screen was speaking. "Her Royal Highness has announced that the $100 million forfeiture from a disqualified bidder will be used to start the Gabriella Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing legal aid and housing for women abandoned by their spouses." Henry watched as the woman he called plain and simple was cheered by thousands. She didn't look angry. She didn't look bitter. She looked like she had already forgotten he existed. The police shoved Henry into the back of the cruiser. As the car drove away, taking him toward a future of prison cells and bankruptcy hearings, Henry Lawson finally realized the truth Gabriella had told him at the restaurant. Be careful what you throw away. He had thrown away a diamond to chase a piece of glass, and now he would cut his hands on the shards for the rest of his life. High up in the Sapphire Palace, Gabriella stood on the balcony, watching the police lights fade into the distance. "Is it done?" she asked softly. Arthur stepped out of the shadows, holding a tray of tea. "It is, Your Highness. He is in custody. The American authorities are waiting for him. Lydia Banks has been dropped by her agency. It seems the fashion world does not appreciate mistresses who cause public scandals." Gabriella took the tea. She inhaled the steam, lavender and chamomile. "Do you feel happy, Mom?" Arthur asked. Gabriella looked out at the ocean. "I don't feel happy about his ruin, Arthur. Happiness isn't built on someone else's misery. That was Henry's mistake." She took a sip of the tea and smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "But I do feel peace," she said. "I spent 5 years trying to shrink myself to fit into his world. I'm finally done shrinking. It's time to grow." She turned back to the warmth of the palace, leaving the cold night behind her. The Queen was back on her board, and the game was finally won. And that is the tragic, satisfying fall of Henry Lawson. He spent his life valuing price tags over people, only to find out that the most valuable thing he ever had was the wife he threw away. Henry thought he was playing chess, but he didn't realize he was playing against a grandmaster who wrote the rules. In his arrogance, he crafted his own downfall, signing away a fortune just to protect his pennies, and ending up with absolutely nothing, not even his freedom. It's a harsh lesson, but a true one. Arrogance is a blindfold, and karma is the wall you eventually run into. So what do you think? Did Henry get what he deserved, or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of royal revenge and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more drama, romance, and karma coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.